everyone. I'm very happy to have you here, and this is the second part of a two-part meeting. The first hour at 3 o'clock was with the business owners, and I've invited them to stay on. And this hour is more about the general public, and so we're excited to have you join us. I'm Kristen Cushman with EcoShift Consulting, and I'm happy to lead this focus group. It's the third series of focus groups in a set of 4. And so after we have this one, we will continue to whittle down a list of potential measures that the city of Los Altos is going to consider as they write their update to their climate action and adaptation plan. So again, my name's Kristen. We have on the call as well Ben Fordham, who is the project manager for this planning process, and Zach Youngerman, who's been helping with the adaptation and vulnerability assessment. And I can see your names, and it is recorded, but what I'd like for you to do, there's a lot of us, there's 35 people, I believe. So we're not going to do individual introductions, but I think what I would like is if you have things that you're doing in your current life, whether it's electrifying your house or composting at home, trying to initiate a community garden, buying an EV, we would love to hear from the general community as to what you're doing that might be, overlooked or unknown to a city. And so that will help us kind of tell the story as the city unfolds this planning process. And so back in 2005, I believe, I lost my, yeah. So the city wrote a climate action plan, and they identified measures that they wanted to implement to help them reduce their greenhouse gases. And so since then, they've been working on implementing those. In 2018, they created a baseline year of all of the emissions that were still remaining. And so what this chart does is it reflects what, as of today, what does the emissions look like if the city did nothing else but what they're doing today. And so you might think that this curve would not go down, it would go up because of population growth, but it does go down, which is the good news. It goes down because the city is working diligently and implementing greenhouse gas emission measures, as well as the Silicon Valley Clean Energy that has come to be a partner of the city and is offering 100% renewable or carbon-free electricity. And so by virtue of that, that does continue to bring the emissions down by 2050. But it remains to be said that there's still a huge amount of emissions that are going to need to be addressed. And whether the city decides to go carbon neutral, which means 0 emissions by 2050, or maybe they'll decide to commit to a 20% reduction by 2035, that's yet to be determined. So today the focus group is about helping the city frame that based on what your reaction is to some of the measures that they're considering. So I have a quote here that says, "Climate change is sometimes misunderstood as being about changes in the weather, but in reality, it is about changes in our everyday way of life." And so today we're going to talk about some measures that you could take or that would impact your daily life that would help make an impact on climate change. So with that, we're going to move into an overview, which is we started out doing a baseline assessment. So we looked at all the measures from 2005, what their current status was, what was working, what hadn't worked, and why hadn't it worked. We also projected the emission forecast out to 2050, which I just showed you. And the third step that we've already achieved is we've done a vulnerability assessment. So we've looked at how weather, drought, wildfire can really make an impact on not only the quality of life in the city, but their greenhouse gas emissions. And so that vulnerability assessment is going to be an addendum to the climate action and adaptation plan. So step 4 is where we're at now. we've done all of that. We've framed it, we've analyzed it, and now we're starting to launch into what is the future for the city of Los Altos, and what do the residents want? What does the business community want? That's what we're here today to discuss. And so we're going to talk in terms of 4 sectors: transportation and energy, which make up over 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions for the city. So those are very significant. We're going to look at the green community and resource conservation. And while we're talking today, I'm going to throw out some ideas. I'm asking you that while I throw out the ideas, you type in the number, which you'll see in a minute, and you can just comment via chat. However, after we go through that, we're going to open it up into a discussion. So I'm hoping that you can raise your hand, unmute yourself, and contribute whatever you feel is a relevant piece. So while we're talking about the greenhouse gas sectors, we want to frame it. How do we prioritize? Should we only pick things that are very impactful in the greenhouse gas emission reductions? Should we only pick things or leverage things that are super cost effective that may not have a huge impact in greenhouse gas emissions? Community benefits. There's tons of things that a city can do, such as transition their fleet into an electric fleet. That doesn't really have a whole bunch of community benefits. So how does that all line up? Effects on the economy, alignment with state and local policies, and then obviously a very important part is equity and climate justice. And so we have created for the city kind of a framework to where we're helping them figure out how to prioritize all of these measures. What does it do in terms of these outcomes? So again, if you could, while I'm talking, if you feel you want to make a comment in the chat, if you could put the number that you're commenting to, that way we can align your comments with the specific measure. So one of the main focuses, as I mentioned, is transportation and energy. So this is going to be a little bit of a speed dating. I'm going to go through these measures and then we'll open it up for discussion. But number 1.1, increase car-free day program at schools. There has been a WOW program at the schools in the last few years. It's been very successful. And what that means is it's a day or 2 per week where parents are encouraged to carpool or walk, not to do the single occupancy vehicle. So that has been very successful, and there's a lot of partnerships that can take place in that. So that's a huge way that we could build education and outreach around commuting. The second thing is explore scooter and or bike sharing program. I think we're all familiar with that. We see those sharing programs downtown in certain cities. I know that there's some problems with maintaining those programs. I think that this was considered in 2005 in the original CAP, and it was deemed not feasible. So we're bringing it back to the table to just understand, is it feasible now? What would it do in terms of the congestion downtown or in certain pockets of the city? Number 3, 1.3, traffic reduction measures for heat alert and air pollution alert days. So for example, if there's a wildfire bringing in a lot of particulate matter, or if it's really hot and it's just an alert day for fire and it's possible that as a business community or a hospitality community, we could put in measures that restrict or incentivize folks not to carpool. So COVID has given us that great outing. Maybe we have, on those days, everyone stays home and telecommutes. That would help with greenhouse gas emissions. That would help with congestion and air particulate matter. So those are just some ideas for how a city could kind of combat that. 1.4, promote and pilot electric shuttle programs across town. So the city's long and narrow, is it possible that you could have a free electric shuttle that could take, a park and ride program, for example, where people could come in, park outside of the downtown core, and then get shuttled into the areas that they need to be shuttled. There's a lot of best practices that prove that that's a great solution, but it may not be for the city of Los Altos. So we're looking for you to help us understand if that's not a good solution. So under electric vehicles, 2.1, explore EV only parking spaces downtown. Obviously that's a long-term goal. It's going to be a while before everyone has an EV, but would it be possible to kind of build an incentive program so that people that don't have EVs had to park a little bit out? We brought that up in the business community, and they're concerned that there are folks that need to be closer to the business that they're trying to patron. So there might be some solutions. One was a golf cart program where they could park into a general outside area and then get shuttled down to their specific establishment. So is that even likely? What does that look like for the city? We're looking for feedback. 2.2, set goal of all new city vehicle purchases being EVs by 2025. That is something that the city is considering, and I just threw that in there so that you understood that the city has a lot of internal goals that they're working on. 2.3, increase public access to fast charging station infrastructure. So there's a lot of grant funding out there. Silicon Valley Clean Energy, for one, they have funding for fast chargers. And so is it something that would make sense to put more in the shopping areas around town and in the public facilities? And so would that help incentivize the public to transition to electric vehicles? And then 3.1, decrease speed limits in town. That's a safety idea as well as a greenhouse gas emission reduction idea. Wondering what you think about that. And then obviously this is a hot topic, but designate downtown car-free zones. There's a lot of places in different cities that have walkable streets, they have walkable malls, and what it does is in my opinion, it keeps people there longer, and so they tend to spend more money, and it's more of a day trip versus an errand. So is that something that the city of Los Altos would be interested in? And so with that, we're going to open it up to discussion. What I would like to know is, out of all of those things, as a general public, what are your priorities? What didn't we include? And then secondly, what would be how would you frame all this? Is greenhouse gas emission reductions more important than community benefit, effects on economy? We would just like to get your input on that. So please raise your hand, and I think Trevor's going to unmute you so that you can talk. I see a lot of Q&As, so that's good. Anyone want to come forward? And again, we would love, I personally would love to know what you're doing as a residential community in terms of, I'm familiar with Greentown and the Village Association and all the great nonprofits that you have in that city. But are there things, in terms of transportation and energy, are there things that you're doing that can be a best practice for your city?
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, I sent an email, but I'd like to read a bit of it out live as it kind of connects to what you were saying.
Okay.
So after kind of listening, firstly, I'm thankful for Los Altos realizing that solutions must come in the form of a community. I think that's a really important aspect of climate action, which a lot of people don't really recognize. But I also want to say that residents are part of the environment. When we talk about conserving the environment, resident and businesses' existence and consumption of, any sort of environmental negative must come hand in hand with how each community thrives. And so I was just curious to know how you would sustain your steps in a way that each individual in Los Altos can contribute.
Well, first of all, what's your name so we can have it for the record? Because I love your comment.
Hi, my name's Nyla.
Nyla. Okay, thank you, Nyla. So building sustainable programs is definitely going to be part of our analysis. And I think that there's a lot of, well, if we can just stay with transportation and energy, because we're about to go into everything else. So I'm just going to answer your question in that framing. But there's a lot of energy rebates. There's a lot of nonprofits that are helping with education on electrification. Sorry, I'm going to move back to this. So the idea is that funding is definitely something that is important to a resident or a commercial business owner. And transportation, changing people's habits in terms of how they get around town, it's not going to happen overnight. And so to build infrastructure, maybe some campaigns around, like I mentioned, the car-free day at the public unified school district. I mean, that touches so many people. And if you can get the unified school district to partner and some nonprofits to help with the education, then that could potentially be a very long-term program. And so I think there's lots of resources that the city of Los Altos can tap into to help make sure that that is sustainable. Did I answer your question?
You did, and I totally agree. I think, what you were saying about the, the cars and the school thing, it actually touches upon how, well, like Los Altos prides itself in using like the newest technological advance because we're Los Altos, we're kind of the middle of the technological world. But we're probably not as mindful in recycling as we could be. It may be down to inaccessibility, but also education and awareness.
Yes. Well, and in that situation, the haulers, the people that haul the trash, your franchise, they have built into their franchise agreement with the city of Los Altos that they will commit certain amount of education and outreach. So pulling that all together to get those waste haulers, green waste, what have you, to come in and help with that school education, with the multifamily education, all that sort of thing. It's really just creating a space within the city where all of those networks can happen. And I think that's what the climate action and adaptation plan is for, is to help pull all of those resources together to help the city propel it toward implementing new ideas that can be consistent and sustainable.
I guess one last thing is I would kind of disagree on that front, because one walk around downtown this morning showed me that there are absolutely no recycling bins or compost, which I think would be an amazing thing for you to do, as it goes back to doing something small that will bring education to the community.
So when I was talking about education, that was from the waste haulers, and so that's separate than the infrastructure piece. So the infrastructure piece, if there's no recycling downtown, that would be something that the city could look at doing. And so that's actually a very good new initiative, new measure that we could consider.
I'm so glad. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else before I move on to the next slide? I'd love to hear your feedback on transportation.
Kristen, can you hear me?
Yes,
this is Frank Martin. I put some comments in the Q&A session and noticed a lot of good ones from other people that you might want to take a look at. But from a personal point of view, I put solar panels on my house last December using a Tesla program that basically allows me to rent the panels, no upfront cost, no maintenance, no anything. And after 20 years, I own them and it's transferable. And if the new owner didn't want the panels, they can be taken off for $1,500, without any notice. So it's a really great program, but most people are unaware of it. It doesn't really do a lot for me because my electric bill is only $1,200 annually. Now I pay Tesla $65 a month, but basically so far since December to now, I'm in a small surplus. So clearly for the year, I will owe nothing to PG&E except $5 a month for, whatever their administrative charges are. But most people I talk to don't even know that that's available, and don't even know, and in looking at it, it's very complicated to figure out, is this really going to work for me? It turns out it's easy with Tesla, but the city could help encourage. I don't know why everyone in this town, I'm a low energy user, and yet it benefits me. So I would think that every house in this town could be covered with solar panels with no upfront cost if the city would somehow work with Tesla to make that fact known, number one. And number two, equally important, when the sun doesn't shine, all of us are 95% dependent on natural gas. So the idea of electric solving our problems is not going to work until we get essentially the grid having a scalable, battery storage, and that may never happen. But it can happen in people's houses, but I'm not willing to lay out $10,000 for a Tesla solar wall panel or two. But again, once again, under certain conditions, PG&E will pay for it. I have a friend who lives in Orinda. He meets two of the three criteria, one of them being living in a fire zone, the other being having a medical condition. In my case, I would qualify just with a CPAP machine, but we're not in a fire zone, so I can't get a free battery. But, the city might be able to do something to encourage that as well, maybe particularly for high usage people, like even the downtown businesses. So
yeah,
it's a thought.
I agree. And so I'll just skip to my partnership slide here, 3.1. So for Marin Clean Energy, I know that our company did their S-chip program, which means we called all these people to figure out, who's eligible for these rebates and why aren't they coming to us? And so I think the city could play a role with Silicon Clean Energy to realize some of those programs that you're talking about, because there is funding, and Silicon Clean Energy has rebates for not only disadvantaged community members but commercial businesses and general. They have an innovation grant and things like that. So as a residential customer, probably you don't sit around and do all that research, but it is there. And so your point about having resiliency at your facility is important. And I think as a city, that's one of the recommendations that we're hoping to make to them, is that the city itself has some of those resiliency elements using the partnership structure that PG&E and the Silicon Clean Energy offer. But so that's a segue into our energy slide. One of the measures that we're considering, again, these are all, I should have mentioned up front, these are all things that we are bringing to the city. They haven't been vetted. We're trying to prioritize them, figure out what's most important to the community. So increasing solar requirements and include battery storage backup systems. That could be on a residential scale, but more importantly, that could be on critical facilities such as fire departments, police stations, etc. So, what does that look like? Silicon Valley Clean Energy brings in a lot of carbon-free energy, definitely helping with the greenhouse gas emission reductions, but in terms of resiliency, it doesn't take it over the finish line. So that might be something we consider. 1.2, implement utility user tax on natural gas. I think right now it's 3.5%, but if we increase that 0.5%, then maybe we could use that 0.5% to invest in clean technologies and EV charging, etc. So that's something that we could consider. 1.3, consider end of flow date for natural gas. I brought this up an hour ago during our business focus group. It doesn't mean that the city is going to turn off gas overnight. It's just a concept. how could the city move away from natural gas over the long term? What does that look like for businesses, for restaurants who need their gas ovens? And so electrifying buildings could be a priority, whether from a residential or commercial space, and obviously municipal as well.
Well, let me comment on that real quickly. As I pointed out, if you did that, you'd be imposing a huge cost to the infrastructure. I looked into replacing my water heater with a tankless water heater, and the problem you get into is, and I already took one step towards that, but it's not practical because we have hard water in Los Altos, and it doesn't work with tankless hot water heaters. So even if you did do that, a lot of people would have to upgrade they may have to upgrade their lines. In my case, I didn't. I got a free upgrade of my meter from PG&E, and I have enough capacity to do it, but I'm not going to do it because I'd have to buy a water softener, which wastes water, in order to make it work. And unless the water we get from Los Altos or from the Cal Water changes, it's just not practical for most people that live in Los Altos because we have hard water. So
okay,
that would be bad. And then the idea of upgrading my stovetop, which is my only other use of natural, well, that's not really true. I have some other natural, or my heating systems. It's, to electric, you'd have to put in a new panel. You'd have to basically run a lot of wiring in the house. You're talking about upgrades on the order of $10,000 at least in terms of order of magnitude, not counting the appliances. So unless the city wants to subsidize that, and by the way, you ought to know that 30 to 40% of the people that live in this town are seniors, depending on what your definition is. I happen to be 78 years young, but there's no way I'm going to make those kind of investments.
Yes, that's fair to say. And I think there's a lot of incentives for heat pumps, but I think you're right. There may not be enough. But I do think in my next slide, or maybe 2 slides from now, there is a suggestion or a measure that we're considering or that we're recommending to the city that maybe they do have an incentive program for some of these things. So that's not off the table. And as Silicon Valley Clean Energy, as they grow and mature as a CCA, I think we could, as a city, push them to offer more incentives for this type of residential thing. So although the solutions aren't evident today, if we're looking out 30 years, we're just trying to figure out, what's the game plan? How, what could we do to kind of push the envelope towards some of these measures? So don't think short term, think more like medium and long term, if that makes sense.
But you need to remember that an all electric house, when the sun, it's not, well, if you're getting it from PG&E, that's one thing. I guess that solves the problem. It's just the upfront cost to do the switching. That's the problem.
Yeah. Well, let me keep going because I think all of this is in your comments, which I really appreciate because it's all, realistic. What you're mentioning is all realistic. How do we overcome all of these expenses? And knowing that we don't really have the time or frankly, the expertise, I wouldn't know how to put in a heat pump. So, but let's go into the building. So another concept, again, these are just things that we're throwing out on the whiteboard is, explore battery storage for city facilities, not necessarily for backups. Well, it's related to 1.1, but, to have an emergency shelter in the case of an emergency and the power, we're all familiar with PG&E's public power shutoffs. In that situation, is the city prepared to have centers where people can come and have the energy, there for them when they need it? And so what would that look like? Could we consider the library as a target for being a cooling center so that no matter what happened with PG&E or the natural environment, we would have a safe space for people to go? And so that's just something that we're putting on the whiteboard. The other thing, and this goes to your point, and I'm sorry, I don't remember, or I don't know if you said your name, but do you want to say it real quick so I can, whoops. the gentleman that was just talking to me?
My name is Frank Martin. I don't want to dominate, so you got
Okay,
my
Frank. Okay. Well, Frank, so Passive House is another incentive that we could consider to kind of combat some of your concerns. And I know that Passive House, there are new construction incentives or standards, and then there's also remodel standards. But we could look at that. How could Passive House help you, not have to do everything all at once and have all this. So that's a huge resource that really hasn't been tapped into on a national scale. And so maybe the city could look into how those standards could help their residential community. 2.3, require additions and remodel constructions to be all electric. We just talked about that. There's probably not, a whole bunch of new construction, at least in the near term, but, starting to move the city toward this. Again, not tomorrow, but just, 30 years from now. And we talked about partnerships. I think that's really the most important piece of this energy piece, the puzzle, is there's money out there. We just got to figure out how to put it all together. So anything that Frank hasn't mentioned or other people want to bring up? Is there something on this list that is important to you that we did not mention?
I do see a hand by Gary Heading.
Okay.
I'm not sure if he's able to unmute himself. Can you check that, Trevor?
Thank you. I got it.
Okay.
So earlier I heard a comment that you were looking for the most impactful measures. I think I heard that anyway.
Yes.
And one of the things that's the sources of greenhouse gases, one of the major ones for us is transportation, cars in particular, as well as natural gas in the home, but cars in particular. And they're build up the bicycle infrastructure, because a number of us, even seniors like myself, do like to ride a bike. So make that safe. I see a lot of green lanes out there, a lot of green paint. That's a good step. And the other thing to keep in mind, I don't know if this is something that you're going to put into the climate action plan, but the zoning. I would like to see clusters of livable neighborhoods with higher density around commercial centers where people could, within a 10-minute walk, get to the shops and the restaurants that they would enjoy. And then they don't have to drive a car or even ride a bike. So if that's a possibility for the climate action plan, I think that'd be a great thing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. And I love these segues. You're doing my job for me. So thank you. So next slide is all about that. Well, not right away, but let's just go through them, because you can see under land use that intensification of development within the downtown core areas is exactly what you're talking about. So that is a zoning issue, and that will keep people downtown or in certain parts. It doesn't have to be downtown, but certain parts where they can work and walk around and shop and visit neighbors, et cetera, and not really have to go anywhere. And so what would that look like if that's a new zoning code? So that's definitely in there. And then 2.2 is, to your point, I think the city is very interested in, and I think they're currently working on it to help. I've seen the map, design more of a bike-friendly pedestrian pathway through town. So right now they have a couple arteries, but they are looking to expand that across the city and make that more of a network. So, and then we'll just move into 2.3. A potential would be within that network, how can we develop green space where there's natural shade and it's more inviting and comfortable for not only the bikers, but the walkers and people who just want to hang out in their neighborhood. So those are not, they're not directly related to greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, they do have emissions associated with them, but they're not as impactful as transportation, well, cars or energy. But to make the city more unique, more valuable, beautification elements, and where people live a more healthy life. I mean, that is equally as important as greenhouse gas emissions. And so that's kind of the ranking I was talking about earlier, is when we're trying to prioritize all this stuff, we're taking all of that into consideration. So
if I can make a comment on the prioritization.
okay.
It seems to me if you look at carbon emissions globally, animal agriculture in particular is on the same order of magnitude as transportation according to the United Nations. So it's about the same level. However, it never shows up here. And I assume the reason it doesn't show up is that we don't actually produce, we don't have big farms with a lot of cattle here in Los Altos. But on the other hand, we do consume it. So if you would calculate carbon emissions, not on production, but on consumption side, a lot of the emissions that are currently counted to somewhere, say in the Midwest, would move to where it's actually consumed, like here in Los Altos. And then we would see the food we eat coming up in these numbers. And then you could consider that it would be at the same level of, say, transportation and energy, and the city could actually do something about promoting plant-based food, both in their own events, maybe promoted on restaurants, promoted to the community, because it's never counted here. It doesn't even show up in any of your slides, as far as I can tell.
I agree, and there are emissions I'm just going to show you this real quick because this is the next slide, but 3.2 does, we do focus on promoting customer awareness around sustainable food choices. And so that could be local food, it could be plant-based food, and there are emissions associated with that. So that could be a behavioral change program that the city decides to include in their climate action and adaptation plan. That's, maybe not chapter 1 and chapter 2, but maybe it's a call out box of all the different types of things that people could do to do on their own to help contribute to the global transition away from greenhouse gas, the beef world and single-use item world and all of that. So that will definitely be part of the planning processes. So that's a great point, though. It's not spelled out in this PowerPoint, and we hadn't drilled down that far, but we do have those emissions to add if the city is interested in that.
I have a comment on the increased green space with natural shade. It's a bit kind of long term, but can be done. I live south of Los Altos, and the streets here are very wide, like 35 feet to 50 feet if you consider the easement. And while north of Los Altos, like Linden, is half of that size. So if we reduce the size of the street, that doesn't need to be so big. Even the cul-de-sac are so big. We can replace this asphalt with green, with plant.
Yeah.
I think we can, first of all, reduce CO2 because then we speed of the will reduce. We capture CO2. We reduce the temperature because asphalt is increasing the temperature, and so it's a mitigation thing. Plants and green will keep the temperature down. We captured water because asphalt is not permeable, but this water on those asphalt-free area, then rain can go into the aquifer. We reduce the risk of flood, and also it's more beautiful. So I think plant will also capture, all the small particles that are in the air. It will be safer street because speed will go down and so on. So I think that is a long shot, but it's worth to consider.
I think those are, I don't want to say obvious, because your comments are spot on, and everyone knows that having a more green environment to live and work within is appealing from a beautification perspective, but we have considered 3.1 and 3.2 carbon farming and increasing urban tree canopy. That's definitely a priority that the city's already said let's look into that. What would carbon farming, although we don't have a lot of ag ranching space, could that be possible in an urban environment? So we're doing a little bit of research as to whether or not the industry of carbon farming is ready for urban sector or not. And if it's not today, maybe it will be in 15 years. But definitely increasing urban tree canopy is a priority. And somewhere in here, oh, here, the increasing green space with the natural shade.
Yeah.
So a lot of those adaptation or
Mitigation. Yeah.
those natural elements, nature-based solutions, as we're calling them, are definitely a huge component of this planning process.
Yeah, I just want to add, if you go and walk along Linden, you know, the Linden is a small street, and there are trees, it's very nice. It creates this environment of a community. Walk Eva here in my area. Well, it's a huge road and there's a street and there's no need for such a big street. There's no canopy. It's totally different feeling. And so I think there's definitely an opportunity to do something.
And I think more visitors and more real estate prices potentially might go up if it's more comfortable and livable and walkable. So that, I mean, I'm just speculating, but yes, that's definitely why these things are included in the potential measures. So
thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm gonna say that we discussed that. I think this has been really great. I appreciate it. I want to do the last slide since we only have 20 minutes. Resource conservation. So some of the ideas we've talked about earlier about waste diversion, and I think there's tons that every city and county in the nation can do. That is a very challenging thing because it requires a lot of education. And so, you know, maybe we could implement some additional education programs. Already we have the waste hauler to help support us. The woman earlier, sorry, I don't remember your name right now, she mentioned, you know, getting recycle bins downtown, implementing more of a robust food program. I think one thing that's not mentioned here is building out the demolition requirements so that when you're pulling a building down or even building a new building, that all of that wood, metal, all those materials get source separated because they won't be recycled if you don't separate them on site. So there's tons of things that the city could support, not necessarily do themselves because they're a city, but, you know, work with the hauler, et cetera. 1.2, require water saving landscaping in all new construction. That could be fairly simple. It could be a policy. Everyone would benefit from that, I think, and that would help with water reduction. 1.3, develop a policy that climate change adaptation is included in every document, not just the climate action and adaptation document, but the general plan, et cetera. That this is, you know, should be the same language across all plans and everyone's using the same objectives, et cetera. Education and outreach, again, we talked about that a lot, but one thing the city could do is not only reduce, reuse, recycle, but repair. There's a whole element that the city could partner with Hope Services, someone like, you know, a nonprofit that could help repair some of the items that are heading to the landfill. And then I think Greentown has a sustainability speaker series, I believe, already. So we should all partner on that and make that more robust to reach more people. We can get it out into the rotaries of the world and to get the message out more frequently. And then last, and then I'll open it up to the group, is sustainable consumption. So we did talk a lot about this, I guess, earlier in our last call, but just reusable foodware and what that looks like and how to incentivize people to not rely on single-use plastics and or compostable items alone. Maybe there's a city campaign through social media that, you know, that encourages people, educates people on it. it could also be a policy that the city could impose on restaurants. I think, you know, the plastic bag ban is an example, straw ban campaign. You know, of course, you don't want to throw too many bans at the restaurants because it's not fair, but, you know, those are just some examples. And, you know, consumer awareness of sustainable food choices, such as the Monterey Bay Seafood Watch Card, those types of things, local, you know, highlighting a farmer if you're a restaurant or a university or a corporate campus. There's tons of stuff that the city could help, you know, providing resources to do. And then again, kind of a repeat, but promote reuse, repair, and recovery and refurbishment economy, just like building that out as a city and making that really robust. So there's tons more that is on our list, but those were the ones that we felt were kind of a first stab in trying to get feedback from the community. So I will stop talking. Is there any additional items that you would like to see, you would like us to put emphasis on?
This is Frank Martin. Can I jump in quickly?
Yeah.
I put this in the Q&A session because I saw it on TV and I looked into it. One thing that we've totally ignored here is basically water. We're running out of water. It's only going to get worse. And basically what I discovered was other towns have recycled water. It's free to the residents, but our current situation is we can get free water from Palo Alto, but you have to drive your car and take your containers there and pay $50 for a permit fee. And that's just not practical. The city should look into making it attractive for vendors to actually offer us recycled water that's delivered to our houses, like I saw on TV is being done in other communities.
Yeah, that's a great component that I had not thought of. We'll look into that. Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? I know it's end of day, but we really appreciate everyone participating, especially on a Monday at 5. If no one else has anything, I think Amiko wants to kind of give next steps. I do know that this process is kind of midway through. We have a lot of work to do still, and nothing's off the table, and nothing, frankly, is on the table at this point. We're just trying to flesh out with the business community, with the internal staff at the city, with the public community, and key stakeholders. We've had a few very productive focus groups. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amiko.
And I do see, Gary, did you hand up for a comment?
Oh, thanks, Amiko. The Environmental Commission actually, Frank, looked at getting purple pipe water, it's called, from the recycling or the waste treatment area in Palo Alto. And it's expensive. We'd have to run a line up into Los Altos, so it's quite a long distance. It's conceivable. It could be done, but it's just very expensive. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So Frank, we'll look into that. I mean, I'm sure I don't know as much as Gary, but we will talk with the city about that and see if there's any grant funding out there. It'd have to be some type of public-private partnership, I would assume. But your comment will not be disregarded. So. Anyone else? I can't see the hand raising. I'm sorry, just because I'm focusing on the camera. But anyone else, Amiko, that has their hand raised?
I do not see any more hands. Right, let me just do another quick look right here.
Okay.
No, I don't see any.
Okay. Well, do you want to talk about the survey and next steps? Okay.
Absolutely. First of all, I want to say thank you. I know some of you stayed on from the original beginning at 3, and so and some came on at 4, but I really do want to say thank you on behalf of the city for coming out, spending an hour or two today. And everything here is extremely valuable in the development of this climate action and adaptation plan. We really encourage the feedback. We look forward to it. And we will be releasing a survey in the next few days. And that will be another opportunity to provide feedback. We encourage you all to participate in that. Additionally, you see Kristen's email address, but also the city has an email that you can send comments to, and that is environment@losaltosca.gov. And I will spell that for you. Environment, ENVIRONMENT @losaltosca.gov. That is also available on the city website if you go to the Environmental Commission page and you go to the Climate Action Plan page. And so, again, look out for that survey. It will be coming out in the next few days. And this workshop is recorded, so we will post this as soon as it's available to our website as well. I thank you for joining us this afternoon, and just really appreciate everybody's participation.
Yes, thank you very much.
And appreciate Kristen and Ben for putting all this together as well.
Oh, absolutely. Our pleasure.